Hello everyone, my name is Nick DeLong. I'm an archaeologist with the Warren Lasch Conservation Center. I will be presenting today with my colleague.
That's me. My name's Gyllian Porteous. I'm a conservator here at the Warren Lasch Center. Nick's going to be starting off our presentation focusing on the archaeological portion of the project, and I'm going to be finishing it up with consultation and conservation.
Yes, so our presentation today is about paddling into the past, conserving South Carolina's oldest indigenous watercraft. Before I get started, though, I would like to have a land acknowledgement. The Warren Lasch Conservation Center is located on the traditional lands of the Etowah, Kiowa, Siwi, and Wando peoples. We would like to express gratitude for the opportunity to live and work on these lands. As a self-identified American of European, specifically Irish immigrant descent, as well as my colleague who is Canadian of Scotch-Irish immigrant descent, we would like to express special thanks. We also recognize the rights of the indigenous peoples of South Carolina to maintain, control, protect, and develop their intellectual property over such cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions. In August 2020, the Warren Lasch Conservation Center acquired temporary rights to what we are referring to simply as the canoe. The first step in this project was to transport the canoe from Fort Johnson to the Warren Lasch Conservation Center. I would like to express special thanks to Jeff Hardy and his group and his amazing team for helping us with an exceptional transportation of the canoe, which went off without a hitch. Once we acquired the canoe, we had to set up a series of goals. Those goals included conducting archaeological research, the conservation of the canoe, as well as the collaboration with the Native American peoples of South Carolina. So a little bit of background on the canoe itself. It was originally found in 1997 and was illegally recovered from the Cooper River by a private citizen. This citizen then tried to sell the canoe. Once the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology caught wind of this, they had to tell this individual that, in fact, the artifact was the property of the state because it was found on public lands. This individual then tried to destroy the artifact, and once SCIAA found out about this, along with the DNR, they confiscated the canoe to protect it. Unfortunately, the individual never gave up the original location of the canoe, and therefore its original context has been forever lost. Once SCIAA recovered the canoe from the individual, they placed it and housed it at Fort Johnson until it was acquired by the Warren Lasch Conservation Center. So a little bit about the canoe specifically. Through carbon dating, we were able to track back that it is 4,170 years old, plus or minus 60. The canoe is composed of one major section that comprises a portion of the bow and hull, as well as 4 fragments. The dimensions of the largest section is 3.15 meters long by 44 centimeters wide. A couple of the diagnostic elements: it was constructed of cypress, which is common in the area. We also have signs of charring and scraping, which indicate to us that it is in fact a dugout canoe. Another interesting part of the canoe that you can see here in the bottom right is that there was a knot that would have been apparent from the original tree itself. Now, this is something they would have had to work around, and they would have placed some sort of organic caulking and fibers to make sure that the canoe did not take on water. So a little bit about Native American canoe construction. Now, this is a type of construction that we see all over the North America region, and it's a tradition that was maintained for thousands of years. And it all began with picking the right tree. The tree needed to be large in diameter, straight, with no twists. Some of these canoes were so large that they would be able to hold up to 20 or more people, so they had to pick the right tree. The types of tree that they would find would vary depending on the location or the region, but often they would use pine, chestnut, red oak, or cypress, among many others. The tree needed to be near water to limit the distance of hauling the boat after it was felled. Now, this also depended on the size of the canoe that they were ended up constructing. The construction would also likely be conducted near where the tree originally stood and would commence shortly after it was felled. Now, specifically looking at the felling of the tree, now they had a very unique way of doing this because they did not have iron or metal tools or saws that we think of today. So what they would do is they would actually strip away some of the bark on the lower level of the tree, place clay or some other wet material around the base, and then start a fire, which would actually burn out the roots and bring down the tree. Now, the clay was really important because that would keep the fire from actually creeping up the rest of the tree and would protect it. Once it was felled, if the fire wasn't used to remove the bark, then they would strip it once it was down. Once the tree fell, they would set and strip from all the bark, they would set a controlled fire that would be created along the top of the trunk, which would soften the wood, allowing them to carve out the center more easily. Now, this fire would be tended to 24 hours a day until it was ready, which could take several days. The boat builders would then use stone or shell tools to scrape the charcoal and shape the canoe itself. You can see here, this is a stone adze that would have been used during this stage. You can see here, this is part of the Wampanoag tribe on the Plymouth Plantation, which has a great historic canoe building on the plantation. Here they are using traditional methods to carve out a dugout canoe. I would like to show a quick video of people explaining this far better than I can.
When we do find a tree and we choose the one that's appropriate for our needs, there's ceremony. You're giving thanks and prayer. You're about to take its life, and you show appreciation for that gift.
So you look for a tree near a river, most likely, or fresh water. And by a river, you have clay, and you got clay beds, and you want to pull up those clay and bring it with you. And when you find a tree, you want to pack the clay around the trunk of the tree. You're looking at probably about 6-8 feet up the tree, and you make maybe a 2-foot barrier of clay. The reason for this is the way you took down trees is not by chopping them down, but by burning them down. So what that clay barrier is going to do is prevent that fire that you build around the trunk of the tree from spreading all the way up the tree.
And then once the tree fell, once that man or the group of guys or whoever was working on the mashoon or boat would get the desired length of their tree and say, okay, this is where I want the front of my boat to be, they would peel some of the tree bark and do a very similar burn and scrape, pack the coal where they didn't want it, almost like a measuring line. This is where I want the burning to stop, and just burn and scrape and burn and scrape. And over time, I imagine probably a handful of days, you would have cut that tree. You would have had your log that you wanted to make into your boat, and the shape of the outsides would have already been accomplished by burning and scraping to cut the wood.
Fire is considered to be the #1 woodworking tool for the man. It's not just used for making boats, but it's used for making spoons, used for making bowls, motors for grinding corn. If you had a piece of wood and you needed to haul it out, you burn out the inside.
I'll show one other video of using the canoe.
There we go.
So, Phil, all right, and you can get this. Yeah, very nice.
You can see here that the canoe could hold between it could vary from a single person used canoe all the way up to, like I said before, up to about 20 people. All right, I will now be passing it on to my colleague, Gyllian.
All right, so I'm going to take everyone through our process of approaching conservation of the canoe. The very first stage of this has been consultation. So as I'm sure everyone is aware at this point, there are many Native American communities living in South Carolina who trace their ancestry all the way back to the woodland period that the canoe was made during. So it was a first priority of ours to involve the Native communities in South Carolina in the conservation of their heritage. Ethically, we think it's important, considering wanting to reconcile with the Native peoples of North America. It can also be justified in many ways, one of which is looking at it through dissociation. We in conservation view dissociation as an agent of deterioration. This concept that when you lose an object from its original context or the community that it represents, there's a loss of its intrinsic and intangible value. And that's certainly what's occurring in this case, where we have this loss of context from losing the original excavation site and some loss of context from the disconnect between current Native Americans and their ancestry. And that's a disconnect that we've created through very horrifying ways, genocide among them. So we want to be actively engaged in repairing this link. So. Sorry, just having a second. There we go, got the slide to move. So yes, so we started with an outreach strategy. So we got in touch with Chief Lamar Nelson of the Eastern Cherokee, Southern Iroquois, and United Tribes of South Carolina under the advice of Christopher Judge, who's the director of the Native American Studies Center at UCS Lancaster. And the way we approached it under their guidance was to create an information packet that we could distribute to all the different communities in South Carolina and would contain all the information relevant so that everyone would have the same information. So in this, we include the background and history of the canoe and its excavation, a condition assessment so they know its current state, including photographs, a consultation plan, so how we were hoping this might go, but obviously open to any sort of modification from the communities, our conservation proposal, because we want to engage the communities in discussion of how we're going to approach conservation and also have their input. We provided a timeline just because these treatments tend to take an extremely long time, so it's good to be aware of that. We gave targeted grants because it's our goal to not ask the Native communities to contribute at all to the conservation of this canoe. It's going to be a fairly expensive treatment, so we need to fund it through grants, then just next steps, and of course acknowledgements. So far we've reached out, we've done this, we've made the information packet, we've reached out to communities across South Carolina. We've so far had interest from 4 different communities as expressed by their chiefs or CEOs. These include the Waccamaw Indian people, Pine Hill Indian Tribe, the Eastern Cherokee, Southern Iroquois, and United Tribes of South Carolina, and the Wassamasaw Indian Nation. So just some information about the consultation event we're hoping to plan. It will have to obviously make allowances for COVID, but essentially what we're trying to do is give the Native American communities of South Carolina an opportunity to examine the canoe, to see it in person, to hear the conservation plan described in person, to be able to ask questions directly to our staff, provide feedback on the conservation plan, feedback on how we're going to disseminate information about this canoe, whether that's privately with communities or publicly with through social media. And we wanted to also give them an opportunity to support, to have some conversations with SCIAA regarding the eventual storage and display of the canoe. And also, lastly, just a chance to perform any ceremonies such as smudging that they might feel are warranted. So that being said, let me give you a little quick intro to the conservation plan. The canoe is extremely old, as we've established, and the condition of its wood is extremely poor. It's essentially like a sponge at this point. We have these two images that I have borrowed from Robert A. Blanchette from the University of Minnesota that really demonstrate well the issue of deteriorated wood that is waterlogged. So whilst the canoe has been waterlogged for thousands of years, bacteria and other agents have deteriorated the wood itself, so broken down the cellular structure. And so it's really only supported by the water that's impregnating the wood at this point. So as soon as we go to dry it out, it goes from the image on the left, which shows the deteriorated cell structure, to the image on the right, which shows the collapse of that cellular structure as the wood dries. The standard treatment for dealing with that in conservation is called polyethylene glycol impregnation, or PEG impregnation. Essentially, I have an image here of the molecule. All you need to know about it is that it's a hydrocarbon that's perfectly safe. It's used in our food, comes in various different molecular weights, which correlate to whether it's a liquid or solid at room temperature. We use polyethylene glycol that's a solid at room temperature. Essentially, we just dissolve it into a solution, submerge our waterlogged wood in that solution, and gradually the PEG penetrates the cells of that wood. So I have some other examples here. This one is taken from a team working at the Thang Long Imperial Citadel site in Vietnam. So it's just a really great example here. A1 and B1 show wood that has not been treated with PEG, but has been allowed to dry, and A2 and B2 shows both the cellular structure and its overall state when it has been treated with PEG and then dried. So as you can see, it makes a huge difference in terms of the structural stability of the wood when we go to dry it out for display. So extremely important this step. So next steps with our project are securing funding. We're in the process of writing grants for that, and then planning the consultation event, and obviously taking steps and precautions for dealing with the pandemic. Nick and I would both like to thank Christopher Judge and Chief Lamar Nelson for all of their support in both developing this presentation and in approaching this project. Also, many thanks to our director, Stephanie Cote, for trusting us and encouraging us to pursue this approach to the conservation of the canoe. And we'd also like to thank Jim Sperrick and John Leader from SCIAA for also entrusting the Warren Lasch with this project. And I think that's it for me.
That's it.
Awesome.